The scorching Arizona sun had just begun to dip below the horizon when Virginia Caldwell woke with a start to the sound of boots scraping against weathered wood. Half-conscious and disoriented, she instinctively reached for the small derringer hidden in the folds of her tattered dress, only to freeze at the silhouette of a tall man standing in the barn doorway, his features obscured by the dying light. "Come with me, and I'll never let you go," said the cowboy to the woman sleeping in a barn. His voice was low and steady, neither threatening nor pleading, simply stating a fact as immutable as the mountains that rose in the distance. Virginia's heart pounded against her ribs. She had been running for too long to trust the kindness of strangers, especially men who found women alone in barns. The year was 1878, and the territory was still wild, lawless in parts, and particularly unforgiving to a woman on her own. "I have a gun," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse and the dust that seemed to permeate everything in this God-forsaken place. "And I am not afraid to use it." The man stepped forward, and Virginia could now see his face weathered by sun and wind, but not unkind. His eyes, blue as the desert sky at midday, regarded her with something that might have been concern. "Name's Caleb Thornton," he said, removing his hat and holding it respectfully against his chest. "And I reckon you're trespassing on my property, madam. Though I can't say I blame you for seeking shelter." Virginia's fingers tightened around the derringer. "Your property? This barn has been abandoned for months." A smile tugged at the corner of Caleb's mouth. "Been away, fighting Apaches with the cavalry down south, just got discharged last week." He gestured to the empty stalls around them. "Place needs work, I know, but it's still mine." Virginia's mind raced. She had nowhere else to go, no money and precious little food. The small town of Redemption was still a day's walk away, and she wasn't sure what awaited her there either. "I'll be gone by morning," she said, trying to sound firm despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Caleb studied her for a long moment, taking in her torn dress, the dirt on her face, and the wary look in her eyes. "Madam, I don't know what you're running from, but night's falling, and there are coyotes out there meaner than any you've likely encountered before. My cabin's just up the hill. Got a spare room with a lock on the door if that makes you feel safer." Virginia didn't move. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me." "Don't need to," Caleb replied. "My ma taught me to help folks in need. Seems to me you qualify." He stepped back toward the door. "I'm making venison stew. Door'll be open if you change your mind." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Virginia alone with her thoughts and the growing darkness. The derringer felt heavy in her hand as she weighed her options. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not after what had happened in St. Louis. But hunger and cold were immediate concerns that couldn't be ignored. After several minutes of internal debate, Virginia gathered her meager belongings, a small cloth bundle containing a spare chemise, a tarnished locket, and the last letter from her sister, and cautiously made her way out of the barn. The cabin sat atop a gentle slope, its windows glowing with warm lamplight. As Caleb had promised, the door was unlocked. Virginia hesitated on the threshold, inhaling the rich aroma of simmering meat and vegetables. "Come in or stay out, but please close the door," Caleb called from inside. "Getting cold, and I can't afford to heat all of Arizona." Virginia stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The cabin was simple but clean, a far cry from the opulent home she had fled months ago. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, a pot of stew bubbling over the flames. A rough-hewn table with 2 chairs stood in the center of the room, and a bookshelf lined another wall, surprisingly full for a bachelor's cabin in the middle of nowhere. Caleb stood by the stove, stirring the pot. He had removed his duster, revealing broad shoulders and the simple clothing of a working man. "Spare rooms through there," he said, nodding toward a door on the far side of the cabin. "As promised, it locks from the inside. Water in the basin if you want to wash up. Stew'll be ready in 10 minutes. Virginia remained by the door, clutching her bundle. "I can't pay you." Caleb glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Didn't ask for payment, just offering a decent meal and shelter to someone who looks like they could use both. I can't." Virginia began, then stopped. Pride was another luxury she could ill afford. "Thank you," she said instead, the words unfamiliar on her tongue after so long alone. Caleb nodded once, then returned his attention to the stew. Virginia retreated to the small bedroom, locking the door behind her as promised. The room was spare but clean: a narrow bed with fresh linens, a small chest of drawers, and a basin of water on a stand. A tiny window overlooked the barn and the distant mountains beyond. For the first time in weeks, Virginia allowed herself to relax slightly. She washed her face and hands, combed her tangled hair with her fingers, and changed into her spare chemise, draping her dress over the chair to air out. When she emerged, Caleb had set the table with 2 bowls of steaming stew and a loaf of bread that looked remarkably fresh. "Baker in town owed me a favor," he explained, noting her surprise. "I don't claim to be much of a cook beyond stew and coffee, but I make do." Virginia sat cautiously, watching as Caleb took the seat across from her. He bowed his head briefly in a silent prayer before picking up his spoon. Virginia followed suit, trying not to eat too quickly despite her hunger. "Got a name?" Caleb asked after several minutes of silence. Virginia hesitated. "Virginia," she said finally, deciding that her first name was safe enough. "Virginia Caldwell. Pleased to meet you properly, Miss Caldwell." "Mrs." Virginia corrected automatically, then winced, "though I suspect that status may be in question now." Caleb's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't press for details. "Well, Mrs. Caldwell, you're welcome to stay until you figure out your next move. I've got plenty of work to do around the place after being gone so long. Won't bother you none." Virginia studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. Men in her experience always wanted something in return. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." Caleb set down his spoon. "Truth is, this place gets mighty quiet. Been away 3 years with the cavalry. Before that, my pa died and my ma followed not long after. Been just me since then." He shrugged. "Besides, like I said, I was raised to help folks in need. And if whoever I'm running from comes looking," Virginia challenged. A dangerous glint appeared in Caleb's eyes. "I spent 3 years fighting Apaches, Mrs. Caldwell. I reckon I can handle whatever trouble might come calling." For the first time in months, Virginia felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she could rest here, just for a little while, before continuing her journey to California. "1 week," she said firmly. "I'll stay 1 week, help with whatever chores need doing to earn my keep, and then I'll be on my way." Caleb nodded. "Sounds fair." He extended his hand across the table. "We have a deal, Mrs. Caldwell." Virginia hesitated only briefly before shaking his hand. His palm was calloused but warm, and his grip firm yet gentle. "1 week," she repeated, as much to herself as to him. Neither of them could have guessed how that week would change both their lives forever. Morning came with the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of coffee brewing. Virginia woke disoriented, momentarily panicked at finding herself in an unfamiliar bed. Then the events of the previous evening flooded back, and she relaxed marginally. She dressed quickly in her worn dress, wishing for the 100th time that she'd been able to bring more when she fled. But escape had been more important than possessions. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Caleb already gone, but a pot of coffee sat warming on the stove, and a plate with biscuits and a jar of preserves had been left on the table. A note sat propped against the coffee pot. "Gone to check the fences. Help yourself to breakfast. Back by noon." Virginia sipped the strong, black coffee gratefully, wondering at the strange feeling of being cared for, even in this small way. It had been so long since anyone had shown her simple kindness without expectation. After breakfast, she set about cleaning the cabin, partly to earn her keep and partly to keep her mind occupied. She found a broom in a corner and swept the floors, washed the dishes from both dinner and breakfast, and even discovered some dried herbs hanging from the rafters that she used to freshen the small space. By mid-morning, she had run out of indoor tasks and ventured outside. The day was clear and bright, the October air crisp but not cold. The barn where she had been sleeping looked even more dilapidated in the daylight, its weathered boards gray with age. On impulse, Virginia headed toward it, thinking she might at least gather the old straw she had been sleeping on and dispose of it. Inside, the barn was cooler, dust motes dancing in the shafts of sunlight that streamed through gaps in the roof. Virginia found herself assessing the structure with a critical eye. It needed work, certainly, but the bones of it were sound. A good sweeping, some patchwork on the roof, and it could be serviceable again. She was so engrossed in her mental inventory that she didn't hear the approaching footsteps until a voice spoke from the doorway. "Planning renovations already." Virginia whirled around to find Caleb leaning against the door frame, an amused expression on his face. Up close and in daylight, she could see him more clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-streaked brown hair and those startling blue eyes. A scar ran along his jawline and his hands bore the marks of hard work. "I was just thinking it's a waste to let a good barn go to ruin," she said defensively. Caleb nodded, looking around. "Been thinking the same. Haven't had the time yet. Fence line had a few breaks and I've been mending those first. Can't have cattle wandering off." "You have cattle?" Virginia asked, surprised. She hadn't seen any animals besides the chickens near the cabin. "Had," Caleb corrected. "Neighbors been looking after what's left of the herd while I was away. Going to bring them back next week once I make sure the place is secure." He studied her thoughtfully. "You know about barns?" Virginia hesitated. "My father had a farm in Missouri before." She trailed off. "Yes, I know about barns." Caleb seemed to sense her reluctance to elaborate. "Well, if you're determined to earn your keep, I wouldn't say no to help getting this place in order again." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Virginia said firmly. "Never thought you were, Mrs. Caldwell." Caleb's expression was serious now. "Though I have to wonder what circumstances led a lady like yourself to be sleeping in my barn, if you don't mind my saying so." Virginia stiffened. "I do mind, Mr. Thornton. My circumstances are my own." Caleb held up his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Fair enough, we all have pasts we'd rather not discuss." He gestured toward the cabin. "I brought back some rabbits for lunch. Thought we could eat, then tackle this place together if you're willing." Virginia nodded, relieved he hadn't pressed further. "That sounds agreeable." As they walked back to the cabin, Virginia found herself studying Caleb surreptitiously. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, his stride long but unhurried. Despite her wariness, she couldn't deny he was handsome in a rugged way, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often or had, before whatever experiences had given him that scar along his jaw. "How long were you with the cavalry?" she asked, breaking the silence. 3 years, Caleb replied. "Signed up after my ma passed, needed the change, I suppose." "And now," Caleb glanced at her. "Now I'm home, time to see if I can make something of this place again." He paused. "What about you, Mrs. Caldwell? Where are you headed?" Virginia hesitated. "California," she said finally. "I have a sister in San Francisco. That's a long journey for a woman alone." "I'm aware," Virginia said stiffly, "but I have little choice in the matter." Caleb seemed about to say more but apparently thought better of it. They reached the cabin, and he busied himself preparing the rabbits for cooking while Virginia fetched water from the well. The domestic routine felt strange to Virginia, almost normal in a way her life hadn't been for months. As they worked side by side, she found herself relaxing slightly, answering Caleb's casual questions about her knowledge of farming and animals. After lunch, they returned to the barn armed with tools and determination. Caleb proved to be a patient teacher, showing Virginia how to repair the simpler breaks in the wooden slats while he tackled the more substantial work on the roof. By sunset, they had made significant progress. The barn was swept clean, half the roof was patched, and most of the broken slats had been repaired or replaced. Virginia's muscles ached pleasantly from the unaccustomed labor, and she felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in a long time. "You're a hard worker, Mrs. Caldwell," Caleb commented as they walked back to the cabin in the fading light. "I appreciate the help." "Virginia," she said impulsively. "You might as well call me Virginia if we're going to be working together for the week." Caleb smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. "Virginia it is, then." That evening, over a simple supper of the remaining rabbit stew, the conversation flowed more easily. Caleb spoke of his plans for the ranch rebuilding the herd, perhaps expanding into horses eventually, while Virginia found herself sharing snippets of her knowledge about crops and animal husbandry. careful to avoid any personal details that might reveal too much. As she retired to her room that night, Virginia realized with surprise that she had almost enjoyed the day. The honest work had been a welcome distraction from her fears, and Caleb's company, though still that of a virtual stranger, had been unexpectedly comfortable. One day down, 6 to go, she thought as she drifted off to sleep. Just long enough to regain her strength before continuing her journey west. Just long enough to help Caleb get his barn back in working order as repayment for his kindness. Not long enough to become attached or to lower her guard completely, or so she told herself as sleep claimed her. The next few days settled into a routine. Virginia and Caleb would breakfast together at dawn, then tackle the endless chores of a ranch being brought back to life after years of neglect. The barn was completed by the third day, and they moved on to repairing fences, cleaning out the chicken coop, and preparing the corral for the return of Caleb's cattle. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes in companionable silence, sometimes sharing stories. Caleb spoke of his time in the cavalry, carefully edited Virginia suspected, to omit the worst of the violence. Virginia found herself sharing anecdotes from her childhood on her father's farm, neutral territory that revealed little of her more recent past. On the fourth day, while repairing a section of fence near the property's boundary, they were interrupted by the arrival of a rider. Virginia tensed instantly, her hand moving toward the pocket where she kept her derringer. "Easy," Caleb murmured, noting her reaction. "That's just Vernon Walsh, my nearest neighbor. Good man." Virginia forced herself to relax as the older man approached. Vernon Walsh proved to be a weathered rancher in his 60s, with a handlebar mustache and sharp, assessing eyes that took in Virginia's presence with evident curiosity. "Thornton," he greeted Caleb, tipping his hat. "Saw you working from my ridge, thought I'd come see if you need any help with those cattle yet." "Plan to come by tomorrow, actually," Caleb replied, extending his hand to the older man. "Place is nearly ready. Vernon, this is Virginia Caldwell. She's staying at the ranch for a spell, helping me get things back in order." Vernon's bushy eyebrows rose slightly, but he tipped his hat politely to Virginia. "Madam, nice to see Thornton here has found himself some pleasant company after all that time with the cavalry." Virginia felt heat rise to her cheeks. We're not." She stammered. Caleb came to her rescue. "Mrs. Caldwell is passing through on her way to California. Kindly agreed to help me whip this place into shape before continuing her journey." Vernon nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. "Well, in that case, Mrs. Caldwell, you should know you're helping one of the finest men in the territory. This boy's father saved my life during an Apache raid back in '68. Mr. Walsh exaggerates," Caleb said, clearly uncomfortable with the praise. "How are the cattle looking?" Vernon allowed the change of subject, though his eyes continued to flick curiously between Caleb and Virginia. "Fat and happy. Got about 20 head ready for you, including that bull you were particular about. Ornery as ever, that one." They discussed the logistics of moving the cattle for a while before Vernon prepared to depart. As he mounted his horse, he looked directly at Virginia. "Redemption's having a harvest dance Saturday next. You two should come. Do you good to meet some folks, Mrs. Caldwell, even if you are just passing through." Before either of them could respond, Vernon tipped his hat once more and rode off, leaving an awkward silence in his wake. "You don't have to," Caleb began. "I wouldn't want to," Virginia said simultaneously. They both stopped, and after a moment, Caleb chuckled. "I haven't been to a town dance in years, probably forgotten how." Virginia found herself smiling despite her discomfort. "I doubt it's something one forgets." "Well, the offer stands if you'd like to go. Might be nice to have an evening of entertainment before you continue your journey." Caleb's tone was carefully neutral, but Virginia thought she detected a hint of something more hope, perhaps. "I'll consider it," she said, non-committal. In truth, the thought of a public gathering filled her with dread. Someone might recognize her, or word might get back to St. Louis somehow. Still, the idea of an evening of normalcy, of music and perhaps even dancing, held a certain appeal after months of fear and running. They returned to their fence mending, but the atmosphere had shifted subtly. Virginia found herself sneaking glances at Caleb as he worked, noting the easy strength in his movements, the concentration on his face as he set posts and strung wire. She had avoided thinking of him as a man rather than simply a temporary benefactor, but Vernon's assumption had brought unwelcome awareness. That evening, after supper, Caleb surprised her by asking, "Would you like to learn to shoot properly?" Virginia blinked. "What makes you think I don't know how?" Caleb's expression was gentle but knowing. "I've seen that little derringer you keep in your pocket, fine for close range but not much use beyond that, and you tense up every time you hear an unexpected sound. Seems to me if you're traveling alone to California, you might benefit from knowing how to handle something with a bit more range." Virginia considered this. He wasn't wrong. The derringer had been her husband's idea of a suitable weapon for a lady more ornament than protection. "I suppose that would be practical," she admitted. Caleb rose and went to a cabinet near the fireplace, returning with a Winchester rifle and a Colt revolver. "We'll start with the Colt tomorrow, more manageable for your size and easier to carry on a journey." Virginia reached out tentatively to touch the revolver, feeling its weight and potential. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not asking why I need to know." Caleb's eyes met hers, serious and understanding. "Everyone out here needs to know how to protect themselves, Virginia, man or woman. Whatever you're running from, being able to defend yourself can only help." The simple acceptance in his voice nearly undid her. For months, she had been alone with her fear, constantly looking over her shoulder. Caleb's matter-of-fact offer of practical help without demands for explanation felt like a gift she wasn't sure she deserved. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Caleb seemed taken aback by the directness of her query. He set the weapons aside carefully before answering. "When I was with the cavalry, I saw a lot of cruelty, men treating other men, women, children like they weren't human. I promised myself if I made it home, I'd try to put some goodness back into the world." He paused. "Besides, I like having you here. Place feels less empty." The simple honesty of his answer touched Virginia more deeply than any flowery declaration could have. She looked away, afraid he would see too much in her expression. "Well, I appreciate the shooting lessons," she said finally. "Practical skills are always useful." Caleb nodded, accepting her retreat to safer conversational ground. "We'll start after breakfast tomorrow. For now, think I'll turn in. Tomorrow's going to be a busy day with the cattle coming back." As Virginia lay in bed that night, she found herself facing an uncomfortable truth. In less than a week, Caleb Thornton had come to mean something to her. His quiet strength, his undemanding kindness, his obvious integrity, all qualities so different from the man she had fled. The thought of leaving in 3 days' time no longer filled her with determination, but with a strange reluctance she hadn't anticipated. "It's just gratitude," she told herself firmly. Just relief at finding safety, however temporary. But as sleep claimed her, Virginia knew she was lying to herself. And that realization terrified her more than any external threat ever could. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect Arizona autumn day. Virginia rose early, determined to master her confusing emotions and focus on the practical aspects of her stay, specifically the promised shooting lessons. She found Caleb already outside, setting up targets at varying distances from the cabin. He looked up as she approached, the morning sun glinting off his hair. "Good morning," he greeted her. "Sleep well?" "Well enough," Virginia replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "Are those for me?" She nodded toward the target's tin cans and bottles arranged on fence posts. "Thought we'd start simple," Caleb confirmed. He picked up the Colt revolver from where it lay on a nearby stump. "Ever fired anything larger than that derringer?" Virginia shook her head. "My father had a rifle, but he never taught me to use it. Said it wasn't ladylike." Caleb's mouth quirked. "With all due respect to your father, I've known a few ladies out here who could outshoot most men. Comes in handy when there's trouble." He demonstrated the proper grip and stance, then handed Virginia the revolver. It was heavier than she expected, and she needed both hands to hold it steady. "Take your time," Caleb advised, moving to stand slightly behind her. "Breathe in, then exhale slowly as you squeeze the trigger. Don't pull or jerk it." Virginia focused on the nearest target, trying to ignore Caleb's proximity and the warmth radiating from him in the cool morning air. She followed his instructions, exhaling slowly as she squeezed the trigger. The report was loud and the recoil stronger than she'd anticipated. The shot went wide, missing the target entirely. "That's normal," Caleb assured her before she could express disappointment. "Try again. This time, I'm going to adjust your stance a bit if that's all right." At her nod, he moved closer, his hands gently positioning her arms and shoulders. "Feet a bit wider apart," he instructed, his voice low near her ear. "Helps absorb the recoil." Virginia was acutely aware of his touch, brief and impersonal though it was. She forced herself to concentrate on the target, not on the man standing just behind her. Her second shot was closer, clipping the edge of the tin can. By the fifth shot, she had hit the target squarely, knocking it from the fence post. "Good," Caleb exclaimed, genuine approval in his voice. "You're a natural, Virginia." She couldn't help but smile at the praise, a warm glow of satisfaction spreading through her. They continued practicing for another hour, Caleb patiently correcting her form and offering encouragement. By the end of the session, Virginia felt more confident with the revolver, though she knew she would need more practice to become truly proficient. "We'll try the rifle tomorrow," Caleb said as they walked back to the cabin. "Though for traveling, the revolver's probably more practical, easier to keep on you." Virginia nodded, appreciating his practical approach. "Thank you for teaching me. I feel less vulnerable." Caleb's expression softened. "Everyone deserves to feel safe, Virginia." The simple statement hit her hard, reminding her of all the years she hadn't felt safe, even in her own home. She looked away, blinking rapidly against unexpected tears. Caleb seemed to sense her emotion. "Vernon should be here with the cattle soon. Why don't you rest a bit? Shooting takes more out of you than you might expect at first." Grateful for the reprieve, Virginia retreated to the cabin. She busied herself preparing a heartier than usual midday meal, anticipating that moving cattle would work up an appetite. The familiar tasks of cooking helped settle her emotions, bringing her back to the practical reality of her situation. By noon, the sound of lowing cattle and men's voices drew her outside. Vernon had arrived with the promised 20 head of cattle and Caleb's prized bull, along with 2 young cowboys to help with the driving. Virginia watched from the porch as the men directed the cattle into the newly repaired corral. Caleb moved with confidence among the animals, clearly in his element. She could see why the cavalry had valued him. He had a natural authority that even the ornery bull seemed to recognize, if not entirely respect. Once the cattle were secured, Vernon and his cowboys accepted the invitation to stay for the meal Virginia had prepared. The conversation around the table was lively, focused on ranching concerns and local gossip, with Vernon doing most of the talking. "Drought's been bad down south," he informed them between bites of stew. "Folks saying it might be a hard winter to make up for it." "You planning to lay an extra feed, Thornton?" Caleb nodded. "Already arranged for hay delivery next week. Got plenty of grazing for now, but I remember the winter of '73, not taking chances." Vernon turned his attention to Virginia. "And you, Mrs. Caldwell, still planning to continue to California? Might want to consider waiting until spring if the passes get snowy." Virginia stiffened slightly. "I don't intend to delay my journey, Mr. Walsh. My sister is expecting me." "Sensible woman might consider winter in Redemption instead of risking mountain passes," Vernon persisted. "We're a friendly town, despite the name, and getting more civilized by the day. Even got a proper school teacher last month." "I'm sure it's lovely," Virginia said politely, "but my plans are set." Vernon shot a significant look at Caleb, who appeared suddenly very interested in his stew. One of the young cowboys, perhaps sensing the tension, changed the subject to the upcoming harvest dance, and the moment passed. After the meal, Vernon and his men prepared to depart. As Caleb walked them to their horses, Virginia overheard Vernon say quietly, "She's running from something, boy. Or someone, you be careful." "She's just passing through, Vernon," Caleb replied, his voice equally low. "And her business is her own," Vernon harumphed. "Just saying these days a man can't be too careful about who he takes in. Even a pretty woman might have trouble following her." Virginia turned away, a chill running through her despite the warm afternoon. Vernon was right, of course. She was bringing potential danger to Caleb's door with every day she remained. The knowledge strengthened her resolve to leave as planned, regardless of her growing reluctance. When Caleb returned to the cabin, his expression was carefully neutral. "Cattle seem healthy," he commented. "Bull's going to need watching, though. He's got a mean streak." Virginia nodded, grateful he wasn't mentioning Vernon's obvious concerns. "I noticed. Reminded me of a bull my father had when I was a girl. Gored one of our hands badly enough to put him in bed for a month." "You know cattle, then?" Caleb asked, seeming genuinely interested. "Some," Virginia admitted, "though it's been years. After my father died, my mother moved us to St. Louis. Said she'd had enough of farm life." The words slipped out before she could catch herself, revealing more than she'd intended. Caleb nodded thoughtfully. "St. Louis is a long way from here, even further from California." Virginia tensed, waiting for the questions she couldn't answer. But Caleb merely rose and collected his hat. "Need to check the cattle are settling in properly. Would you like to come along? Could use an extra pair of eyes." The simple acceptance of her partial revelation without pressing for more loosened something in Virginia's chest. "I'd like that," she said softly. They spent the remainder of the afternoon tending to the cattle, with Caleb explaining his plans for breeding and expanding the herd. Virginia found herself offering suggestions based on her childhood experiences, and Caleb listened attentively, implementing several of her ideas immediately. As they worked side by side, Virginia became increasingly aware of Caleb, the easy strength in his movements, the gentle way he handled even the most temperamental animals, the occasional smile that transformed his serious face. She caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, noticing details she had no business noticing. The way the sun brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair, the precise shade of his eyes, not just blue, but the deep, clear blue of mountain lakes, the small scar near his left eyebrow that she hadn't observed before. "Stop it," she scolded herself. "In 2 days, you'll be gone. There's no future here." But as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Virginia couldn't deny the peace she felt in this place, a peace she hadn't experienced in years. The thought of returning to the road, to the constant fear and vigilance that had been her companions for months, filled her with a weariness that settled deep in her bones. That evening, as they sat before the fire after supper, Caleb broke their companionable silence with an unexpected question. "Have you given any more thought to Vernon's invitation? To the harvest dance?" Virginia looked up from the sock she was darning, one of Caleb's with a hole worn through the heel. "I hadn't really considered it seriously." Caleb nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Just thought it might be nice for you to see a bit of civilization before continuing your journey. Redemption's not San Francisco, but the folks are friendly enough." Virginia hesitated. The prudent course would be to refuse, to avoid any public appearance that might later be remembered and reported. And yet, "Would you like to go?" she asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Caleb looked equally surprised. "Been a while since I've been to anything like that," he admitted. "But with the right company, I expect I could enjoy it well enough." The implication hung in the air between them. Virginia found herself at a crossroads, the safe path of continued isolation, or the risk of one evening of normalcy, of perhaps even joy. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I think I would like to go to the dance." The smile that spread across Caleb's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, warm, and transformative. "Then we'll go," he said simply. "Day after tomorrow before you leave." The reminder of her imminent departure cast a shadow over the moment, but Virginia pushed the thought aside. One evening of happiness before returning to her solitary journey, surely she could allow herself that much. "I don't have anything suitable to wear," she realized aloud, glancing down at her worn dress. "There's a mercantile in town," Caleb said. "We could ride in tomorrow, get what you need." He paused. "If you'd like, that is." Virginia considered this. A trip to town carried risks, but also offered practical benefits beyond a new dress. She could inquire about transportation options to California, perhaps even arrange passage on a westbound stage. That would be sensible, she agreed. I need to make arrangements for the next leg of my journey anyway. Something flickered in Caleb's eyes, disappointment perhaps, but he nodded. We'll leave after breakfast then. Town's about 2 hours' ride from here. As Virginia retired to her room that night, her emotions were in turmoil. The prospect of the dance filled her with a nervous anticipation she hadn't felt in years, while the knowledge of her departure loomed like a storm on the horizon. She removed the locket from her bundle of belongings, opening it to reveal the miniature portrait inside her sister Victoria, 5 years her senior, smiling as she always had before she left for California. The letter that had arrived 6 months ago had been brief but clear. If you ever need sanctuary, there is always a place for you here. At the time, the offer had seemed like a lifeline. Now, holding the locket in Caleb's quiet cabin, with the sounds of the Arizona night all around her, Virginia wondered if she was running toward something or merely away. 2 more days, she reminded herself as she closed the locket and returned it to her bundle. 2 days to enjoy this unexpected interlude, then back to the reality of her situation. Sleep came slowly that night, and when it did, her dreams were filled with dancing shadows and a pair of blue eyes that seemed to see straight through to her soul. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for their planned trip to town. Virginia rose early, washing her face and hands in the basin and doing her best to make her appearance presentable with the limited resources available. She brushed out her hair, which had grown longer during her months on the run, and pinned it up in a simple but neat style. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was already up, frying bacon and eggs on the stove. He glanced up as she entered, and something in his expression, a flash of admiration quickly concealed, made her cheeks warm. "Morning," he greeted her. "Thought we could use a hearty breakfast before heading to town." "It smells wonderful," Virginia replied, moving to pour them both coffee. The domestic scene struck her suddenly how easily they had fallen into routines together, anticipating each other's needs, moving around the small cabin in unconscious harmony. "Don't get used to this," she reminded herself sternly. Breakfast was consumed mostly in silence, both of them seemingly lost in their own thoughts. As they cleared away the dishes, Caleb said, "I've saddled the horses. The bay mare is gentle but spirited, should suit you if you're comfortable riding." Virginia nodded. "I grew up riding." "It's been a while, but I'm sure it will come back to me." "Good," Caleb said. "Faster than the wagon, and the weather's fine." They set out shortly after, Virginia somewhat self-conscious in her worn dress but grateful for the sturdy shawl Caleb had lent her against the morning chill. The mare proved to be exactly as described, gentle enough to be manageable, but with enough spirit to be enjoyable to ride. As they rode side by side across the rolling landscape, Virginia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the horse's gait and the companionable silence between them. Caleb seemed content to let her enjoy the journey without feeling the need to fill the quiet with conversation, a quality she appreciated after the forced sociability of her previous life. Occasionally, he would point out a landmark or share a brief anecdote about the territory, but mostly they rode in easy silence, the only sounds the creak of leather, the steady thud of hooves, and the call of birds overhead. About an hour into their journey, they crested a hill to find a breathtaking vista spread before them, the town of Redemption nestled in a valley, surrounded by mountains that seemed to touch the sky. "It's beautiful," Virginia said softly, reining in her horse to better appreciate the view. Caleb nodded, his expression thoughtful. "First time I saw it after coming back from the cavalry, I just sat here for nearly an hour watching. Hadn't realized how much I'd missed it until that moment." Virginia glanced at him, struck by the quiet emotion in his voice. "It must have been difficult being away for so long." "It was necessary," Caleb replied. "After my parents died, the place held too many ghosts, needed time away to remember the good parts." He looked at her then, his expression open and unguarded. "Coming back was the right decision, though. This land gets in your blood." Virginia understood what he meant. Despite her years in St. Louis, she had never stopped missing the open spaces and changing seasons of her father's farm. The city, with its crowded streets and social constraints, had always felt slightly suffocating, even before her marriage had turned into a prison of its own kind. "I know what you mean," she said softly. "Some places just feel like home, no matter how long you've been away." Something passed between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits. Then Caleb cleared his throat and nudged his horse forward. "We should keep moving if we want to get our business done and be back before dark." The spell broken, Virginia followed him down the hill toward Redemption. The town was larger than she had expected, with a proper main street lined with businesses, a general store, a hotel, a bank, and the inevitable saloon. People moved about with purpose, and Virginia was relieved to see several women among them, suggesting Redemption had indeed progressed beyond the lawless frontier outpost it might once have been. Caleb led them to a hitching post outside the general store, dismounting smoothly before coming around to help Virginia down. His hands at her waist were strong and steady, and she was momentarily flustered by the proximity, by the clean scent of soap and leather that seemed to cling to him. "Thank you," she murmured, quickly stepping away once her feet were on the ground. If Caleb noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign. "Thought we'd start here," he said, nodding toward the store. "Get what you need for the dance, then see about your travel arrangements." The general store was well stocked for a frontier establishment, with goods ranging from practical necessities to small luxuries. The proprietor, a rotund man with spectacles perched on his nose, greeted Caleb warmly. "Thornton, heard you were back. Vernon mentioned you might be coming to the dance." His curious gaze shifted to Virginia. "And this must be the lady he mentioned." Virginia tensed, but Caleb's response was casual. "Mr. Dawkins, this is Mrs. Virginia Caldwell. She's passing through on her way to California and needs a dress for the dance tomorrow night." Mr. Dawkins bowed slightly. "Pleased to meet you, madam. My wife handles the ladies' goods. Mary," he called toward the back of the store. "Got a customer needs your help, Mrs." Dawkins emerged from behind a curtain, a pleasant-faced woman with graying hair and kind eyes. She assessed Virginia with a practiced gaze, noting the quality of her worn dress despite its condition. "Looking for something for the harvest dance, are you? Come along to the back. We've got several ready-made dresses that might suit, or fabric if you prefer to sew your own." Virginia followed her to a corner of the store where several dresses were displayed. "Ready-made would be best," she admitted. "I'm continuing my journey soon and won't have time for sewing, Mrs." Dawkins nodded understandingly. "Traveling alone, dear?" The question was gentle, without judgment. "Yes," Virginia replied cautiously. "I'm joining my sister in San Francisco." "That's a long journey," Mrs. Dawkins commented, selecting a dress from the display. "This blue might suit your coloring. Not the latest fashion from back east, mind you, but quite nice for our little town." The dress was indeed lovely, a deep blue cotton with a modest neckline and simple embellishments. Virginia touched the fabric appreciatively. "It's beautiful," she said truthfully. "Try it on, Mrs." Dawkins encouraged, gesturing to a small curtained alcove. "I'm a fair hand with alterations if it needs adjusting." The dress fit surprisingly well, needing only minor adjustments to the hem. When Virginia emerged from the alcove, she found Caleb waiting nearby, his arms laden with supplies. He stopped mid-conversation with Mr. Dawkins when he saw her, his expression changing in a way that made Virginia's heart beat faster. "That suits you," he said simply, but the appreciation in his eyes said far more. Virginia felt herself blushing like a schoolgirl. "Thank you, Mrs. Dawkins has excellent taste." Mrs. Dawkins beamed at the compliment. "Just needs a slight hem adjustment. I can have it ready by this afternoon if you're staying in town that long." Caleb glanced at Virginia questioningly. She hesitated, then nodded. "We have other business in town. We can return later." While Mrs. Dawkins began pinning the hem, Virginia selected a few other necessities, a new chemise, stockings, and a simple shawl for the journey ahead. She was acutely aware of the limited funds she had managed to bring with her when she fled, but these were practical purchases she could justify. When it came time to pay, however, Caleb stepped forward. "Add it to my account, Mr. Dawkins." Virginia immediately protested. "That's not necessary. I can pay for my own things." Caleb's expression was gentle but firm. "Consider it thanks for your help with the ranch this week. I'd have had to hire someone otherwise. Before she could argue further, Mr. Dawkins was already writing up the receipt, clearly accustomed to Caleb's instructions. Virginia swallowed her pride with difficulty, promising herself she would find a way to repay him before she left. Outside the store, Caleb suggested they visit the stage office to inquire about transportation to California. The news there was less encouraging. Next westbound stage isn't for 2 weeks, the agent informed them, checking his schedule book. Heavy rains washed out part of the route. They're repairing it now, but it'll be a fortnight at least before regular service resumes. Virginia's heart sank. 2 weeks was far longer than she had planned to stay in one place. The risk of discovery increased with every day she remained in the territory. Are there any alternatives? She asked, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. Private transportation, perhaps, the agent shook his head. Not unless you want to join a freight wagon train, madam, and those aren't suitable for a lady traveling alone. Some don't even take passengers. He glanced at Caleb. If your husband were traveling with you, that might be different. He's not, Virginia began automatically. We'll consider our options, Caleb interrupted smoothly. Thank you for your time. Outside the stage office, Virginia tried to control her rising panic. 2 weeks, she said, more to herself than to Caleb. I can't stay in one place that long. Caleb studied her with concern. Virginia, whatever you're running from, don't, she cut him off sharply. Please don't ask me questions I can't answer. Caleb was silent for a moment, then nodded. All right, but my offer stands. You can stay at the ranch as long as you need, no questions asked. Virginia looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The offer was tempting, too tempting. 2 more weeks of peace, of Caleb's undemanding company, of feeling safe for the first time in months. But 2 weeks also meant 2 more weeks of risk, of growing attachment, of complication she couldn't afford. Let's get something to eat, Caleb suggested, breaking into her troubled thoughts. There's a decent cafe here. Then we can pick up your dress and head back to the ranch. Virginia nodded, grateful for the practical suggestion and the chance to postpone any decision. The cafe was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the aroma of fresh baked bread. They were seated at a corner table by a window overlooking the main street. As they waited for their food, Virginia found herself watching the townspeople passing by, women with shopping baskets, men in business suits, children playing. Normal life, something she had almost forgotten existed during her months of running. Penny for your thoughts, Caleb asked quietly. Virginia glanced at him, then back to the window. Just thinking how strange it is to see everyday life continuing. Sometimes I forget that most people simply live without looking over their shoulders constantly. Caleb's expression softened. That's how it should be for everyone. Including you, Virginia. Before she could respond, their food arrived, hearty beef stew with fresh bread still warm from the oven. Virginia realized she was ravenous, and they ate in companionable silence for several minutes. About the stage, Caleb said eventually. If you're determined to leave soon, there might be another option. Vernon mentioned a freight wagon heading to Tucson next week. From there, you could catch the southern route to California. It's longer, but might get you there sooner than waiting for the direct stage. Virginia considered this. Would they take a female passenger? If I vouched for you, probably. The wagon master owes Vernon a favor, and Vernon owes me several. Caleb hesitated. It won't be comfortable travel, mind you. Rough roads, basic camping. I'm not afraid of discomfort, Virginia said firmly. If it means continuing my journey sooner, I'm willing to consider it. Caleb nodded, though something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely pleased with the plan. I'll speak to Vernon about it at the dance tomorrow. The reminder of the dance brought a flutter of anticipation to Virginia's stomach, quickly followed by guilt. How could she look forward to something so frivolous when her situation remained so precarious? They finished their meal and returned to the general store, where Mrs. Dawkins had completed the alterations to Virginia's dress. As they rode back to the ranch in the late afternoon light, Virginia found herself torn between conflicting emotions: dread at the prospect of continuing her dangerous journey, reluctance to leave the safety she had found with Caleb, and a shameful, secret excitement about the dance tomorrow night. One night she promised herself, One night of normalcy, of perhaps even happiness, before facing reality again. The evening passed quietly, with Caleb tending to the cattle while Virginia prepared a simple supper. They ate together, as had become their custom, sharing the events of the day and planning for tomorrow's work. As Virginia prepared for bed, she found herself lingering at the small window in her room, gazing out at the stars scattered across the Arizona sky. In 2 days, she would be leaving this place, this brief haven. The thought brought an unexpected ache to her chest, just gratitude, she told herself again, just appreciation for his kindness. But as she drifted off to sleep, Virginia knew the truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous to her heart. The day of the harvest dance dawned bright and clear, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. Virginia woke early, her first thought a mixture of anticipation and regret. This would be her last full day at Caleb's ranch. She dressed quickly in her worn dress, knowing she would change into her new blue one for the dance that evening. When she emerged from her room, she found Caleb already outside, tending to the morning chores. Through the window, she could see him in the corral with the ornery bull, moving with calm confidence as he checked the animal for any signs of illness or injury. Virginia busied herself preparing breakfast, finding comfort in the familiar routine. By the time Caleb came in, stamping the dust from his boots, she had coffee brewing and biscuits in the oven. "Morning," he greeted her, his smile warming his usually serious face. "Smells good in here." "Just biscuits," Virginia replied, oddly flustered by the simple compliment. "I thought we could use a proper breakfast before all the work today." They ate together as had become their habit, discussing the chores that needed attention before they could leave for the dance. Caleb seemed more talkative than usual, telling her stories about previous harvest celebrations in Redemption. "Town really comes alive for these dances," he explained. "Folks come from miles around, good chance for everyone to socialize before winter sets in." Virginia nodded, trying to imagine Caleb in such a setting. He seemed so much a part of this isolated ranch that it was difficult to picture him in a social gathering. "Do you enjoy dancing?" she asked impulsively. Caleb looked slightly embarrassed. "Been a while, but I know the steps well enough." "My mother insisted I learn properly, said no son of hers would embarrass her at social functions." His expression softened at the memory. "She loved music. Used to play the piano we had in the front room before." He trailed off, and Virginia felt a pang of sympathy. "Before she passed away." She prompted gently. Caleb nodded. "Influenza. Took her and my father within a week of each other. I was away in Tucson at the time, buying supplies. By the time I got back," he shook his head. "That's when I joined the cavalry. Couldn't bear to stay here alone with the memories." Virginia reached across the table impulsively, covering his hand with hers. "I'm sorry, Caleb." He turned his hand, briefly squeezing hers before withdrawing. It was 5 years ago now. Coming back was the right decision. They would have wanted the ranch to continue. The moment of connection passed, but something had shifted between them. As they went about their morning chores, Virginia found herself more aware of Caleb, the way he moved, the cadence of his voice, the rare but transformative smile that softened his features. By mid-afternoon, the essential work was complete, and they began preparing for the dance. Caleb disappeared to the creek to bathe and shave, while Virginia heated water for her own ablutions in the privacy of her room. Dressing in the blue gown felt like stepping into another life, a glimpse of the woman she might have been in different circumstances. The fabric was soft against her skin, the color bringing out the blue of her eyes. She arranged her hair as best she could without a proper mirror, pinning it up in a simple but elegant style. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was waiting by the fireplace. He had transformed as well, his usual work clothes replaced by clean trousers, a white shirt, and a dark vest. He had shaved carefully, and his damp hair was neatly combed. He looked younger, less weathered, and undeniably handsome. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the expression that crossed his face made Virginia's breath catch. Admiration, certainly, but something deeper as well, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. "You look beautiful, Virginia," he said simply. She felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You clean up rather well yourself." Caleb smiled, a hint of self-consciousness in his expression. Did my best. Been a while since I had occasion to dress for anything but work. He crossed to a small cabinet and removed something from a drawer. Thought you might like to wear these. Belong to my mother, nothing fancy but... He held out a small box containing a pair of simple pearl earrings. Virginia stared at them, then at Caleb, deeply touched by the gesture. Oh, Caleb, I couldn't possibly, just for tonight, he interrupted gently. They've been sitting in that drawer for years. My mother would have liked knowing they were being worn again, especially by someone. He hesitated. Someone who appreciates them. Virginia hesitated only a moment longer before accepting the box. Thank you, they're lovely. She put them on, feeling their cool weight against her skin. How do they look? Perfect, Caleb said softly. Then, clearing his throat, he added more briskly, we should get going if we want to make it to town before the dancing starts. The ride to redemption was magical in the fading afternoon light. Caleb had hitched his two best horses to a small buggy, more comfortable for Virginia in her dress than riding astride. The air was cool but not cold, scented with sage and pine from the surrounding hills. They talked easily as they traveled, sharing stories and observations. Virginia found herself speaking more freely than she had in months, though still careful to avoid specifics about her past. Caleb seemed content with this, never pressing when she fell silent or changed the subject. Redemption was transformed when they arrived, the main street festooned with lanterns, and the town hall alight with activity. Music spilled from the open doors, a lively fiddle tune that made Virginia's feet want to tap in time. Caleb helped her down from the buggy, his hand lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. Ready? He asked, offering his arm. Virginia took a deep breath, then nodded, placing her hand on his arm. Ready. Inside, the town hall had been decorated with autumn leaves and harvest bounty pumpkins, corn shocks, and apples arranged artfully around the perimeter of the room. A small band played on a raised platform at one end, while tables laden with food and drink lined the other. The center of the room had been cleared for dancing, already occupied by several couples whirling to the music. Virginia felt a momentary panic at the crowd, her old fear of discovery surfacing. But as Caleb led her further into the room, she was greeted with nothing but friendly curiosity and warm welcomes. Vernon Walsh approached them almost immediately, his wife, a plump, pleasant-faced woman, at his side. Thornton, Mrs. Caldwell, glad you could make it. He performed the introductions, and Mrs. Walsh immediately engaged Virginia in conversation about her journey and the dance. For the next hour, Virginia found herself meeting what seemed like half the population of Redemption. Caleb remained attentively at her side, smoothly fielding questions that might have been too personal and ensuring she always had refreshments. The simple courtesy touched her deeply, reminding her of what real gentlemanly behavior looked like, not the performative gallantry of St. Louis society, but genuine consideration for her comfort and feelings. When the band struck up a waltz, Caleb turned to her. Would you do me the honor? He asked, extending his hand. Virginia hesitated only briefly before placing her hand in his. I'd be delighted. He led her onto the dance floor, one hand settling respectfully at her waist, the other holding hers. As they began to move with the music, Virginia was surprised by how naturally they fell into rhythm together, as though they had danced this way 100 times before. You dance very well, she observed, looking up at him with a smile. Your mother would be proud. A shadow of emotion crossed Caleb's face. She would have liked you, he said quietly. Strong but kind, like her. The simple comparison touched Virginia deeply. I wish I could have met her. They continued dancing, gradually moving closer as the floor became more crowded. Virginia was acutely aware of Caleb's proximity, of the clean scent of soap and the slight roughness of his hand holding hers. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt truly safe, and more than that. She felt seen as herself, not as someone's wife or daughter or sister, but simply as Virginia. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. Here, in this moment, with this man, she could glimpse a different life, one with companionship, respect, perhaps even love. But it was a life she couldn't have, not with the shadows of her past still pursuing her. As the waltz ended, Caleb seemed reluctant to release her, and Virginia was equally reluctant to step away. They stood for a moment, still close, until the band struck up a livelier tune and the spell was broken. "Would you like some punch?" Caleb asked, his voice slightly rough. Virginia nodded, needing a moment to collect herself. As Caleb went to fetch refreshments, she made her way to the edge of the room, fanning herself with her hand and trying to calm her racing heart. Mrs. Walsh appeared beside her, a knowing smile on her face. "He's a good man, Caleb Thornton," she said without preamble. "One of the best in the territory." Virginia nodded, unsure how to respond. "Yes, he's been very kind to me." Mrs. Walsh's expression softened. "We all need kindness, especially when life has been hard." "And it has been hard for you, hasn't it, my dear?" Virginia stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." The older woman patted her arm gently. "No need to explain. I recognize the look a woman who's known trouble. Had the same look myself once, long ago, before I met Vernon." She glanced across the room to where her husband was engaged in animated conversation with several other ranchers. Sometimes the right person can help you find your strength again. Before Virginia could respond, Caleb returned with 2 cups of punch. Mrs. Walsh excused herself with a meaningful smile, leaving them alone. "Everything all right?" Caleb asked, noting Virginia's expression. She nodded, accepting the punch gratefully. "Yes, just a bit warm from dancing." They sipped their drinks in companionable silence, watching the dancers. Virginia was aware of curious glances from some of the townspeople, but the looks seemed merely interested rather than suspicious. Vernon approached them as the evening wore on, drawing Caleb aside for what appeared to be a serious conversation. Virginia watched them from a distance, noting the intensity in Caleb's expression and the way he occasionally glanced in her direction. When he returned to her side, his face was unreadable. "Vernon's arranged everything with the freight wagon," he said without preamble. "They leave for Tucson day after tomorrow. If you're still determined to go, there's a place for you." Virginia felt a sudden hollowness in her chest. "That's very good news. Thank you for arranging it." Caleb nodded, his eyes searching hers. Virginia, whatever he had been about to say, was interrupted by the band leader announcing the last dance of the evening, a slow waltz. Caleb hesitated, then extended his hand once more. "One more dance before we go." Virginia placed her hand in his, feeling as though she stood at a crossroads. As they moved together on the dance floor, closer now than before, she was acutely aware that this might be their last dance, their last night together. "What were you going to say?" she asked softly. Before the music started, Caleb's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "That you don't have to go," he said, his voice low. "That you could stay, at least until the stage starts running again, or longer if you wanted." Virginia's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Caleb, I know you're running from something, Virginia. I won't ask what. But whatever it is, we could face it together." His blue eyes held hers, earnest and unwavering. "I've never met anyone like you. Strong, brave, kind, despite whatever hardships you've faced. This past week has been. I didn't realize how lonely I was until you came along." Virginia felt tears threatening. "You don't know me," she whispered. "Not really." "I know enough," Caleb replied. "I know how you are with animals, gentle but firm. I know you're smart and resourceful. I know you can outshoot most men after just one lesson." That brought a small smile to her lips despite herself. "I know that when you sleep, you sometimes call out a name, Victoria, your sister, I'm guessing." Virginia nodded, surprised he had heard her through the bedroom door. "My older sister, she's in San Francisco. And is she expecting you?" "Really?" Caleb's question was gentle, not accusatory. Virginia looked away. "She wrote that I would always have a place with her if I needed it, but she doesn't know I'm coming, doesn't know I left St. Louis." They continued dancing, their steps slowing as the music began to wind down. Caleb's next words were so quiet she almost didn't hear them over the music. "What are you running from, Virginia? Who hurt you?" The simple, direct question asked not out of curiosity, but concern broke something inside her. The tears she had been holding back spilled over and she stopped dancing, pulling away slightly. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't talk about it here." Caleb immediately nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, I'm sorry." He guided her gently off the dance floor, finding a quiet corner away from curious eyes. "We can leave whenever you're ready." Virginia wiped away her tears, frustrated by her own weakness. "I'm sorry, you've been so kind and I've ruined your evening." "You haven't ruined anything," Caleb said firmly. "Nothing that matters anyway." The ride back to the ranch was quieter than the journey into town had been. Virginia was lost in thought, weighing her options, considering for the first time the possibility of staying, of trusting Caleb with her story. The risk seemed simultaneously terrifying and liberating. When they arrived at the cabin, Caleb lit the lamps and built up the fire against the night's chill. Virginia stood by the window, looking out at the star-filled sky, gathering her courage. "My husband is looking for me," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear that still lived in her chest. "Charles Caldwell. He's a wealthy businessman in St. Louis, respected, influential." She turned to face Caleb, who had gone very still by the fireplace. "And he nearly killed me." Caleb's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue at her own pace. "We married 4 years ago. I was young, naive, flattered by the attention of an established man 15 years my senior. At first he was charming, generous, everything a young woman might want in a husband." Virginia's voice grew distant, remembering. "The changes were gradual, criticism of my appearance, monitoring my comings and goings, isolating me from friends, even my sister." She unconsciously touched her ribs, where the worst of the bruises had finally faded. "The first time he hit me was after a dinner party. I had apparently smiled too long at one of his business associates. He apologized the next day, blamed it on too much brandy. I believed him." Caleb's hands had clenched into fists, but still he remained silent, his eyes never leaving her face. It got worse over time, more frequent, more violent. He was always careful, though never my face, never where it would show. And always so sorry afterwards, so charming to the outside world. "No one would have believed me if I'd told them." Virginia took a deep breath. "Until this spring, when he came home in a rage over a business deal gone wrong. I thought he would kill me that night. I truly did." She moved away from the window, needing to pace as she spoke. "I started planning then. Saving what money I could, a few dollars here and there from the household accounts. When Victoria's letter came, offering sanctuary if I ever needed it, I knew it was time. I waited until Charles was away on business, took what I could carry, and fled." Virginia finally looked directly at Caleb, her chin raised defiantly. "That was 4 months ago. I've been traveling west ever since, always looking over my shoulder. Charles has connections everywhere, private detectives at his disposal. He'll never let me go, not out of love, but pride. He can't bear to be abandoned, to lose what he considers his property." The silence that followed her confession was heavy with unspoken emotions. Virginia waited, braced for pity or worse, disbelief. Instead, Caleb crossed the room in 3 long strides and stopped before her, his eyes blazing with a controlled anger that was not, she realized with relief, directed at her. "If Charles Caldwell ever sets foot on my property," he said quietly, "he'll leave in a pine box." The simple, matter-of-fact statement was more reassuring than any flowery promises of protection could have been. Virginia felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of secrecy she had carried alone for so long. "Now you understand why I can't stay," she said softly. "I won't bring that danger to your door, Caleb. You've been too good to me." Caleb shook his head. "You're not bringing danger, you're running from it. There's a difference." He took her hands in his touch gentle despite the anger still evident in his eyes. "Virginia, this territory is vast. Your husband may have connections in the cities, but out here, we look after our own. Vernon, Mrs. Walsh, most of the folks you met tonight, they'd stand with us if trouble came." The us in his statement wasn't lost on Virginia. "Why would you risk so much for someone you barely know?" Caleb's expression softened. "I think you know why," and she did. She had seen it in his eyes when they danced, felt it in the gentle way he treated her, recognized it in his quiet acceptance of her exactly as she was. "Caleb," she began, not even sure what she wanted to say. He released her hands, stepping back slightly to give her space. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. The freight wagon doesn't leave for 2 days. Just promise me you'll consider staying. at least until we know if your husband is actually searching this far west." Virginia nodded slowly. "I'll consider it." Caleb seemed satisfied with that. "It's late. We should both get some rest." As Virginia prepared for bed, removing the borrowed pearl earrings and carefully folding her new blue dress, her mind was in turmoil. The prospect of staying, of building a life here with Caleb, was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time since fleeing St. Louis, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by running and fear, but the risk remained. Charles was not a man to forgive what he considered betrayal. If he found her, his rage would encompass not only her, but anyone who had helped her, especially a man he would see as a rival. Virginia lay awake long into the night, weighing her options, her fear battling with the growing hope that had taken root in her heart during her days at the ranch. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a troubled sleep. She woke to the sound of rain pattering against the cabin roof. The room was dim, suggesting an overcast day ahead. For a moment, Virginia lay still, listening to the peaceful sound and inhaling the scent of coffee that suggested Caleb was already up. A decision crystallized in her mind as she rose and dressed. She would stay not forever, not yet, but long enough to see if a life here was truly possible. Long enough to explore the connection that had grown between her and Caleb. Long enough to learn to trust again. When she emerged from her room, she found Caleb at the stove frying bacon. He looked up as she entered, his expression carefully neutral, giving no indication of his own thoughts about their conversation the previous night. "Morning," he greeted her. "Sleep well." Virginia nodded, moving to pour herself coffee. "Yes, thank you. Once I made a decision." Caleb's hands stilled momentarily over the skillet. "Oh," Virginia took a deep breath. "I've decided to stay at least until the regular stage service resumes, if that's still acceptable to you." The smile that spread across Caleb's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "More than acceptable, Virginia." They ate breakfast together, making plans for the day despite the rain. There was indoor work to be done, repairs to tack, planning for winter supplies, preserving the last of the garden produce. The domesticity of it all struck Virginia anew, how easily they worked together, anticipating each other's needs and movements. As they cleared away the breakfast dishes, Caleb suddenly stopped, his expression growing serious. "Virginia, there's something I need to say." She turned to face him, her heart quickening at his tone. "I want you to stay more than I can say," he began. "But I need you to know that there are no expectations that come with this arrangement. You're free to have your own room, your own space, for as long as you want it. Nothing needs to happen between us that you don't want." The careful respect in his words, so different from Charles's possessive assumptions, touched Virginia deeply. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." Caleb nodded, visibly relieved that she understood. "Good. Now, I thought we might start on those harnesses that need mending." Rain looks set in for the day. They worked companionably through the morning, side by side at the table, repairing leather straps and discussing plans for the ranch. The domesticity of it all was both novel and comforting to Virginia, a glimpse of what a partnership between equals might look like. By midday, the rain had intensified, drumming steadily on the roof and running in rivulets down the windows. Caleb periodically checked on the cattle, returning damp but reporting that all was well. After a simple lunch, Virginia found herself drawn to the bookshelf that lined one wall of the cabin. The collection was eclectic practical manuals on ranching and animal husbandry, history books, and to her surprise, several volumes of poetry. "My mother's," Caleb explained, noting her interest. She loved Wordsworth especially. Said his descriptions of nature reminded her of the ranch, even though he was writing about England. Virginia traced the spine of one volume. "My father used to read poetry to us sometimes on winter evenings. It's a good memory." Caleb seemed pleased by this connection. "Feel free to read anything that interests you. Books are meant to be enjoyed, not just looked at." Virginia selected a volume of Wordsworth, settling into a chair by the fire while Caleb worked on his accounts at the table. The peaceful domestic scene, rain outside, warmth within. Each of them occupied but together filled Virginia with a contentment she had almost forgotten was possible. As evening approached, the rain showed no sign of abating. Caleb went out to check the animals one final time before dark, returning soaked despite his oilskin coat. "Storm's picking up," he reported, hanging his dripping coat by the door. "Might be in for a long night of it." Virginia rose to stir the stew she had prepared for their supper. "Everything secure, as can be," Caleb replied, warming his hands by the fire. "Bull's restless, but the barn's solid." They ate by lamplight, the rain and wind providing a constant background to their conversation. Virginia found herself speaking more freely about her childhood on her father's farm, her mother's determination that her daughters would have opportunities she never had, her sister, Victoria's adventurous spirit that had eventually led her to California. Caleb listened attentively, occasionally sharing his own memories in return, his father teaching him to ride, his mother's love of music, the games he had played as a boy in the hills surrounding the ranch. "It must have been lonely sometimes, growing up so isolated," Virginia observed. Caleb considered this. "Sometimes, I suppose, but there was always work to be done, animals to tend, places to explore, and town was close enough for social occasions." He smiled ruefully. "Though I can't say I was much for socializing as a boy, too shy." Virginia found this difficult to reconcile with the confident man before her. "You, shy. Hard to believe, I know," Caleb admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "Amazing what 3 years in the cavalry will do for a man's confidence. When you've faced Apache warriors, making conversation at a dance seems less daunting." The mention of the cavalry prompted Virginia to ask a question she'd been curious about. "How did you get that scar on your jaw?" Caleb's hand went automatically to the mark, a thin white line that ran from just below his ear to his chin. "Skirmish with some raiders near the Mexican border. Got careless, let one of them get too close with a knife." He shrugged. "Could have been worse." "Man next to me took an arrow through the throat." Virginia winced at the matter-of-fact description. "I'm sorry you had to see such things." "Part of life out here," Caleb replied, though his eyes had grown distant. "Though I hope that's changing, territories settling down, becoming more civilized. Maybe our children won't have to face the same dangers." Our children. The casual phrase hung in the air between them, neither acknowledging it directly but both aware of its implication. Virginia felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the fire. The moment was broken by a particularly loud crack of thunder, followed by the sound of panicked animals. Caleb was on his feet instantly. "That sounded too close," he said, reaching for his coat. "Need to check the barn." "I'll come with you," Virginia said, already rising. "2 sets of hands will be better if the animals are spooked." Caleb looked like he might argue, then nodded. "Stay close. It's pitch black out there." They ventured into the storm together, the wind driving the rain horizontally against them. Caleb carried a lantern, its light barely penetrating the darkness. They made their way carefully to the barn, where the animals were indeed distressed, especially the bull, which was pawing the ground and tossing its massive head. "Lightning must have struck nearby," Caleb shouted over the noise. "Need to calm them down before someone gets hurt." For the next hour, they worked side by side, soothing the frightened animals with calm voices and gentle hands. Virginia was grateful for her childhood experience with livestock, as she helped secure loosened gates and distribute fresh hay to distract the cattle. The bull remained a challenge, but Caleb approached it with calm confidence, speaking in low, steady tones until the massive animal finally settled. Virginia watched, admiring his skill and patience. By the time they had all the animals settled, both were soaked to the skin despite their rain gear. The storm continued unabated as they made their way back to the cabin, leaning into the wind. Inside, Caleb immediately built up the fire while Virginia fetched towels. They stood before the hearth, shivering as they dried off as best they could. "You should change," Caleb said, noting Virginia's sodden dress. "Last thing we need is you catching pneumonia." Virginia nodded, retreating to her room to change into her spare chemise and the shawl Caleb had lent her days ago. When she returned to the main room, Caleb had also changed into dry clothes and was pouring 2 mugs of coffee. liberally laced with whiskey. For medicinal purposes, he explained with a slight smile, handing her a mug. Best remedy for a soaking. Virginia sipped the strong brew gratefully, feeling its warmth spread through her. They sat before the fire, side by side in comfortable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. "Thank you for your help with the animals," Caleb said after a while. "Not many women would have ventured out in such weather." Virginia smiled. "Not many women grew up on farms, I suppose. Besides, they're your livelihood. Couldn't let them come to harm when an extra pair of hands might help." Caleb studied her over the rim of his mug, his expression thoughtful. "You understand the life here, don't you? Really understand it, not just the romantic notions some people have of the West." Virginia nodded. "I have no illusions about how hard it is. The isolation, the physical labor, the constant vigilance against all the things that can go wrong, weather, predators, illness." She paused. "But there's freedom in it too, a life built on your own terms, answerable to no one but yourself and nature." "And God," Caleb added quietly. "Yes," Virginia agreed. "And God." Another comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the storm outside. Virginia felt her eyelids growing heavy, the warmth and the whiskey-laced coffee making her drowsy after their exertions. "You should get some rest," Caleb observed, noticing her fatigue. "Been a long day." Virginia nodded, reluctantly rising. At the door to her room, she turned back. "Caleb," he looked up questioningly. "I'm glad I decided to stay." The smile that spread across his face was worth any risk she might be taking. "So am I, Virginia. So am I." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Virginia woke to the sound of Caleb moving about in the main room, the aroma of coffee drifting under her door. As she dressed, Virginia took stock of her situation. She had chosen to stay, at least temporarily, to see if a life here with Caleb was possible. The prospect was both exhilarating and terrifying, hope and fear in equal measure. When she emerged from her room, Caleb was just returning from checking on the animals. "Morning," he greeted her with a smile. "Everyone weathered the storm just fine. Even that ornery bull seems calmer today." "That's good news," Virginia replied, pouring herself coffee. "What needs doing today?" Caleb's smile widened at her matter-of-fact question. "Thought we might ride the property line, check for any damage from the storm, if you're interested, that is." Virginia nodded, pleased at the prospect of seeing more of the ranch. "I'd like that." After a hearty breakfast, they saddled the horses and set out. The landscape was washed clean by the rain, colors more vibrant under the clear blue sky. Virginia rode alongside Caleb, listening as he pointed out landmarks and explained the boundaries of his property. "All this is yours?" she asked, impressed by the expanse of land that stretched in all directions. Caleb nodded. "My father homesteaded it 30 years ago when this was still Apache territory. Built it up little by little. I've added a few sections since I've been back, mostly watershed land to the north." "It's beautiful," Virginia said sincerely. The rolling hills, dotted with pines and cut by a meandering creek, had a wild majesty that touched something deep within her. They rode for several hours, stopping occasionally to repair minor damage from the storm, a fallen tree across a fence line, a washed-out section of trail. Working together had become natural, their movements complementary, anticipating each other's needs without discussion. At midday, they stopped by a small pond fed by a spring. While the horses drank, Caleb spread a blanket on a grassy spot and produced a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples from his saddlebags. "Your father chose well," Virginia observed as they ate, looking out over the water to the hills beyond. "This land has everything needed for ranching, water, grazing, shelter." Caleb nodded, pleased by her assessment. He had a good eye, looked past what was to what could be. He glanced at her. "That's a rare quality in a person." Virginia understood he wasn't just talking about his father anymore. "Sometimes it's hard to see possibilities when you've been focused on survival for so long." "I understand that," Caleb said quietly. "After my parents died, it was all I could do to get through each day. Joining the cavalry was a way to avoid thinking about the future at all." He paused. "Coming back was the first time I let myself consider what might be, rather than just what was." Virginia nodded, understanding completely. And now, what do you see for the future of the ranch? Caleb looked around, his expression thoughtful. Growth, but careful growth. Quality over quantity for the herd. Maybe some horses eventually. I've always had a fondness for good horseflesh. A proper garden again, like my mother kept. He hesitated. Maybe children someday to pass it all on to. The simple, heartfelt description of his hopes touched Virginia deeply. It was a future anyone might want: honest work, a life built with care and attention, a legacy to leave behind. It sounds wonderful, she said softly. Their eyes met, and Virginia felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of shared hopes, of possibilities neither had dared speak aloud until now. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. They looked up to see clouds gathering on the western horizon. Another storm coming, Caleb observed, rising and offering his hand to help Virginia up. We should head back. They packed up quickly and mounted their horses, setting a brisk pace back toward the ranch. The storm was moving faster than expected, however, and they were still a mile from the cabin when the first fat drops of rain began to fall. There's a line shack just over that rise, Caleb called, pointing ahead. We can wait it out there. They urged their horses forward, reaching the small structure just as the heavens opened. It was a simple one-room cabin, built for cowboys watching the herd during calving season or bad weather. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and rustic furnishings: a narrow cot, a small table with 2 chairs, and some shelves stocked with basic supplies filled the rest of the space. Caleb quickly built a fire while Virginia tended to the horses, securing them under the small lean-to attached to the shack. By the time she came inside, the fire was crackling cheerfully, providing both light and warmth against the sudden chill brought by the storm. Not much, but it's dry, Caleb said, gesturing around the small space. I keep it stocked with essentials. Never know when you might need shelter out this way. Virginia nodded, warming her hands by the fire. It's perfect, better than being caught in the open. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the small windows and thunder rumbling overhead. Virginia found herself oddly content in the snug little shelter, listening to the elements rage outside while she and Caleb remained safe and dry within. Caleb checked the supplies, producing coffee and some jerky. Not exactly a feast, he apologized, but it'll tide us over until we can get back to the cabin. They sat at the small table, sharing the simple fare and talking easily as the storm continued. Virginia found herself studying Caleb's face in the firelight, the strong lines of his jaw, the scar that spoke of dangers faced, the kindness in his blue eyes. She had known him less than 2 weeks, yet felt she understood his character more completely than she had ever understood Charles, despite years of marriage. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked, catching her gaze. Virginia considered deflecting the question, then decided on honesty. "That I feel safe with you, truly safe in a way I haven't felt in a very long time." Caleb's expression softened. "I'm glad," he said simply. "That's important." "It is," Virginia agreed. "More important than I realized." She hesitated, then added, "When I first arrived, when you found me in your barn, I was so afraid, not just of you but of everything. I'd been running for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to just be." Caleb nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Fear changes a person. Makes the world look different." "Yes," Virginia said softly, "but so does kindness, so does." She trailed off, not quite ready to name the emotion that had been growing between them. Caleb reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "Virginia," he began, his voice low and serious. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing, still figuring out what you want, but I need you to know how I feel." Virginia's heart pounded in her chest, both anticipating and fearing his next words. "I care for you," Caleb continued. "More than I thought possible in such a short time. I don't expect anything, I just wanted you to know that if you decide to stay, it would make me very happy, and if you decide to go, I'll understand. But either way, I'll never regret the time we've had together." The simple, honest declaration brought tears to Virginia's eyes. No flowery phrases, no grand promises, just truth, offered without expectation or demand. "Caleb," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I care for you too, But I'm afraid, not of you, never of you, but of what might happen if Charles finds me. He's a vengeful man and he has resources, connections. Caleb's grip on her hand tightened slightly. Virginia, look at me. When she raised her eyes to his, he continued, I meant what I said at the cabin. If that man ever sets foot on my property, he'll regret it. I'm not boasting or making idle threats. I'm simply stating a fact. I protect what's mine. The possessive phrase might have frightened Virginia once, but from Caleb, it felt different, not a claim of ownership, but a promise of partnership, of shared defense against any threat. I believe you, she said softly, but I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you because of me. Nothing's going to happen to me, Caleb assured her, but even if it did, it would be my choice, my decision to stand with you, he paused. That's what it means to care for someone, Virginia. To choose them every day, come what may. The profound simplicity of his definition moved Virginia deeply. It was so different from what she had experienced with Charles, where love had been used as a weapon, a justification for control and possession. Outside, the storm was beginning to abate, the thunder more distant, the rain less intense. Within the small shack, however, another kind of storm was brewing, one of emotion long suppressed, of possibilities newly recognized. Virginia rose from her chair, her decision made. She moved around the table to stand before Caleb, who looked up at her with question in his eyes. I choose you too, she said simply, and bent to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question being asked and answered. Then Caleb stood, drawing her into his arms, and the kiss deepened, becoming something more, a promise, a beginning. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. Are you sure? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Because if you're not, we can wait. I would wait for you, Virginia, as long as it takes. The sincerity in his voice, the respect implicit in his question, confirmed what Virginia already knew in her heart. This man was nothing like Charles. With Caleb, she was a person, not a possession, a partner, not a subordinate. I'm sure, she whispered, and this time when their lips met, there was no hesitation, only certainty. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving behind a washed, clean world and the promise of a rainbow on the horizon. Inside, two people who had known loneliness and loss found in each other the possibility of a new beginning. They returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, the landscape gilded with golden light. The ride back was filled with a new awareness of each other, small glances and smiles exchanged, the occasional touch of hands as they rode side by side. That evening, as they prepared supper together in the cabin's warm kitchen, Virginia felt a sense of rightness, of belonging that she had never experienced before. This, she realized, was what home should feel like, not a place of fear and control, but of safety and partnership. As they sat at the table together, Caleb reached for her hand. I've been thinking, he began, about your situation. Virginia tensed slightly, the habit of fear not yet completely broken. Caleb squeezed her hand reassuringly. I have a friend in Tucson, a lawyer. Good man, discreet. Might be worth consulting him about your options. Divorce isn't common, but in cases like yours, it can be granted. Virginia stared at him, the possibility taking shape in her mind. You think that's possible, even with Charles's influence? We're a long way from St. Louis, Caleb pointed out, and the law's the law even for wealthy men, worth looking into at least. Hope, cautious but real, blossomed in Virginia's chest. Yes, she said, it is worth looking into. Caleb nodded, satisfied. I'll write to him tomorrow. In the meantime, he hesitated. I want you to know that whatever happens, however long it takes, I'm here. There's no rush, Virginia. We have time. The simple reassurance meant more to Virginia than any passionate declaration could have. Caleb understood that she needed time, needed to heal, needed to find her own strength again before she could fully embrace a new relationship. Thank you, she said softly, for understanding. Caleb smiled, that transformative expression that lit his entire face. I reckon some things are worth waiting for. In that moment, looking at the man across from her, strong but gentle, patient but passionate, a man who saw her as she truly was and valued what he saw, Virginia knew she had found something rare and precious. Something worth fighting for, worth overcoming fear for. I love you, she said, the words emerging naturally without planning or calculation. I didn't expect to, but I do. Caleb's eyes widened slightly, then softened with an emotion that matched her own. I love you too, Virginia. Have almost from the first day, I think. He rose and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair and taking both her hands in his. I don't have much to offer besides this ranch and my heart, but both are yours if you want them. Virginia looked into his earnest blue eyes and saw the future not perfect or without challenges, but real and true and theirs to build together. I do want them, she said, both the ranch and your heart, and in return I offer you mine. Caleb's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He leaned forward to kiss her, sealing their declaration with a touch that promised both passion and tenderness. That night, Virginia slept more peacefully than she had in years, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The weeks that followed were filled with both ordinary work and extraordinary joy as Virginia and Caleb built their life together. True to his word, Caleb wrote to his lawyer friend in Tucson, who responded with cautious optimism about Virginia's legal options. It will take time, Caleb warned her after reading the letter, and there may be difficulties, but John believes a divorce can be obtained, especially given the circumstances. Virginia nodded, more relieved than she could express. The possibility of being legally free of Charles, of being able to start anew without always looking over her shoulder, was worth whatever process lay ahead. As autumn deepened toward winter, Virginia wrote to her sister Victoria, explaining her situation and her new life at the ranch. The response, when it came, was filled with both relief and joy. I had feared the worst when I heard you had left St. Louis, Victoria wrote. Charles has been making inquiries all along the railroad routes, but fortunately seems convinced you headed east toward our cousins in Boston, not west. I am overjoyed to hear you have found not only safety but happiness. This Caleb sounds like a remarkable man, and I cannot wait to meet him and to see you again, dear sister. Perhaps in the spring when travel is easier. The knowledge that Charles was looking in the wrong direction provided additional peace of mind, allowing Virginia to fully embrace her new life without constant fear of discovery. As winter settled over the ranch, bringing shorter days and occasional snowfall, the cabin became a haven of warmth and companionship. Virginia and Caleb worked side by side during the days, tending to the animals, preserving food, and preparing for the harsher weather ahead. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, sometimes reading aloud from Caleb's mother's books, sometimes simply talking, learning more about each other with each passing day. Their physical relationship developed gradually, with Caleb ever mindful of Virginia's past experiences and determined never to rush or pressure her. When they finally came together as husband and wife in all but name, it was a joining of equals, tender and passionate and healing. The harvest dance had marked the beginning of their story together, and as Christmas approached, Redemption planned another celebration, a holiday gathering at the town hall. This time, Virginia accompanied Caleb without fear or hesitation, proud to be by his side, her hand tucked securely in his arm. The townspeople had accepted her as Caleb's companion with a minimum of gossip, and even Vernon Walsh, who had initially been cautious, had become one of their strongest supporters. Never seen Thornton so happy, he confided to Virginia during the Christmas gathering. You're good for him, Mrs. Caldwell, good for each other, I'd say. The use of her married name was a reminder that officially she was still tied to Charles, but in her heart, Virginia had already taken a new name not yet legally, but in all the ways that mattered. When spring arrived, bringing new calves and fresh green growth to the ranch, a letter came from Tucson. Caleb's lawyer friend had filed the necessary papers, and a hearing date had been set. Charles had been served with divorce papers, and while he had initially contested the filing, the evidence of his abuse carefully documented by Victoria and a sympathetic family doctor in St. Louis had eventually led him to withdraw his opposition, likely fearing the public scandal. It's really over, Virginia said wonderingly, reading the letter. I'm free. Caleb, who had been watching her anxiously, let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. I hoped it would be settled before I asked you this, he said, reaching into his pocket, but I can't wait any longer. He knelt before her, holding out a small velvet box that had clearly been in his family for generations. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small, perfect diamond. Virginia, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. From the moment I found you in my barn, you've brought light back into my life. Will you marry me, officially, legally, in front of God and everyone? Virginia's vision blurred with tears of joy. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Caleb, I will marry you. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to take her in his arms, sealing the promise with a kiss that spoke of all their tomorrows. They were married in the small church in Redemption on a perfect June day, with Victoria having made the journey from San Francisco to stand at her sister's side. Vernon and Mrs. Walsh were there, along with what seemed like half the town, all coming together to celebrate a love that had grown from the most unexpected beginning. Come with me and I'll never let you go, Caleb whispered as they danced at their wedding celebration, echoing the words he had spoken that fateful day in the barn. I meant it then, and I mean it now. Virginia smiled up at her husband, her heart full to overflowing. I'm not going anywhere, she promised. This is where I belong, with you, always. 5 years later, the Thornton ranch had prospered beyond Caleb's initial hopes. The herd had doubled in size, and Caleb's dream of raising horses had become reality, with several of their mares producing foals that were already gaining a reputation throughout the territory. The cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, a son, James, now 3 years old, and the image of his father, and twin daughters, Elizabeth and Margaret, just celebrating their first birthday. Victoria was a frequent visitor, having established a successful millinery business in Tucson that allowed her to travel to the ranch several times a year. Of Charles Caldwell, they had heard nothing since the divorce was finalized. He had remarried, according to Victoria's sources, a young woman from a wealthy Boston family, and seemed to have put his Arizona connections firmly behind him. On the anniversary of the day Caleb had found Virginia sleeping in his barn, they made a tradition of riding out together to the lined shack where they had sheltered from the storm and first acknowledged their feelings for each other. Did you ever imagine that first day that we would end up here? Virginia asked as they sat together on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the landscape in gold and crimson. Caleb considered the question, his arm around her shoulders. Not specifically, he admitted, but I knew there was something special about you even then. Something that made me want to say those words. Come with me and I'll never let you go, Virginia quoted, smiling at the memory. Caleb nodded. Best words I ever spoke, he said, pressing a kiss to her temple, even if they did sound a bit forward at the time. Virginia laughed, leaning into his embrace. They were exactly what I needed to hear, even if I didn't know it yet. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the land that had become their home, Virginia reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from fear to safety, from isolation to connection, from mere survival to a life rich with love and purpose. I love you, Caleb Thornton, she said softly, turning to face her husband. Thank you for finding me that day. Caleb's smile was as warm as the day they met, his blue eyes still able to make her heart skip a beat. I love you too, Virginia Thornton, and I always will. As they rode back to the ranch in the gathering dusk, Virginia's heart was full. The woman who had once slept in a barn, running from a painful past, had found not just shelter but a home, not just safety but joy, not just a protector but a partner. And as the lights of their cabin came into view, with their children waiting inside, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice that day when she decided to take a chance on trust, on hope, on love. Caleb had promised never to let her go, and he had kept that promise not by holding her captive, but by creating with her a life so full and rich that she would never want to leave. A life built on respect, partnership, and a love that had begun with a simple invitation one fateful day in an Arizona barn. Come with me and I'll never let you go, he had said, and she had, and they never did.